Welcome to Career Insights with Ambition, the podcast where we delve into leaders' moments of truth that shape their careers and the businesses they work in. I'm your host, Chris Crolla, and each month we sit down with leaders to uncover the untold stories of their journey to success. Don't miss the next episode. Follow or subscribe wherever you listen. Hello and welcome to Career Insights with Ambition. I'm Chris Crolla, your host, and I'm here with Clive Kingsley. Clive is the head of finance, Invest Networks these days, mate. You're 18 years experience. Can't believe that for such a fresh-faced chap as yourself. Started PwC in South Africa, made the move here January 2017. I think you got the job in PwC here, and as a lot of people may not know, actually placed you in your first commercial role here in Australia.
Yes, that's right. That's true.
And you still talk to me.
Clearly I'm a sucker for punishment.
It was a great role, that, and you've done very well. So I'm very proud of you, very, very impressed. And, you got experience in a few industries now, accounting services, technology, and obviously more recently, or now, insurance. In your spare time, a doting father, lover of politics, which we won't talk about on this podcast. But anything I've missed? What else do you get up to?
Oh, no, that's that. Look, I think between having a pretty busy job, being a single parent, and dealing with the chaos of the modern world, I think all of those things keep me pretty busy. Being a cliched South African, I'm a massive rugby supporter, rugby union.
Yeah, who's your team?
So obviously being South African, the Springboks. And then the Sharks was my local team from Durban, because that's originally where I'm from in South Africa. So if there is a heaven, depending on your religious beliefs, I think rugby is definitely heaven's game. I'm also, obviously, I'm a big cricket supporter as well. So the nice thing of moving to Australia is, whilst rugby union isn't that big here, it is still supported pretty widely. And cricket's obviously pretty big in this country too. So that's been quite a nice thing to assimilate into as well. So
nice, easy move for you, isn't it? Like, it's culture's similar enough, like in the sporting sense anyway.
Definitely. A sporting sense, yes. Culturally has had its ups and downs. But yes, I think Australia has been very good to me. And I've had my ups and downs in especially 8 years that I've been here as of the 21st. Yeah. Without wanting to talk about politics, I actually got to Australia the day that Donald Trump became president the first time.
Right.
So it's literally 8 years to the day that I've been in the country now.
Right.
It's certainly been quite a ride. So.
Absolutely. What any moments in that time that stand out as achievements for yourself since you've been here the last 8 years?
No, look, I think there's a couple of things. I think, to give you a bit of a roundabout answer, you talk about the role that you placed me in. Something I'm naturally not very good at. I'm not very big into networking or, meet and greets and stuff like that. It's something that doesn't come very naturally to me. But being the small world that it is, as you know, is that my old boss who got the job through at Count, he worked with my boss from Johannesburg in South Africa. They went to school together. Clearly, you must have done a good job by putting my name forward. But I think what got me over the line with the last 5% was the fact that my mentor in South Africa put in a good word for me with Lawrence when I got the job at Count. So yeah, that was a good role. I struggled a bit in my first role in Australia. It was just an environment that wasn't quite for me. Whereas at Count, I've always enjoyed working for entrepreneurial type managed businesses. I think that's been a sweet spot with my skill set, and I really enjoyed it. You think working for a professional services firm, how exciting can it get? Because it's accounting and financial planning. But it was a business that had a hell of a lot going on. There was a huge restructure that happened. There was all sorts of M&A activity. And something that's a bit of a strength and a weakness on my CV is, I'm a bit of a jack of all trades with a master of none. So that I was quite proud of that role and what I did in the time that I was there. And then when I went to Ratura after Count, something I was quite proud of the fact was they were only listed literally for 3 weeks when I joined in early 2022. And, whilst it was a successful business and still continues to do very well to this day, a lot of things from a listed point of view just weren't quite there. So we'd never drafted an annual report as a listed company. We'd never done half-year accounts as a listed company. Running through an audit as a listed company can be a real pain in the neck. So something for me, what was a career highlight was, whilst a lot of pain came with it, I'm very proud of the fact that I helped be a small part of making all of those things happen and get signed off. Because, when you're in the listed space, you've got tight reporting deadlines.
Absolutely.
And getting all that done was a career highlight. And I think in the current role that I've gone into now, being head of finance at Invest Networks, is, I've always been number 2 or number 3 in the finance teams I've worked in. And whilst I still do report up into group, obviously, I finally have got my first time that I'm running a finance team in my own right. And it's something that I'm very proud of. And in this particular role, I thought there was a hell of a lot of M&A activity in my previous two shops. This place is probably more chaotic than the previous two combined. So not only is there more M&A activity than what I can deal with, we've also had a new ERP rollout. We've had a new expense management system, a new AP system. We're also going to be changing insurance platforms because I work in the insurance industry now. So we've got all that and the day-to-day BAU, as well as all this M&A activity that's happening. So I've certainly feel like I've been earning my salary these last couple of months. So
it's like you're selling the fact you're earning your salary to anyone that's listening to this podcast. It's good. Mate, you mentioned you've done yourself a bit of disservice saying that you're a jack of all trades, master of none. I think you've definitely mastered the M&A activity, because that's been a big part of a few of your roles, would you say?
Yes, very much so, Chris. So I think that's what attracted a couple of my employers to my CV in the first place, was when I worked in South Africa for the 7 years after qualifying before I moved here, for 5 of the 7 years I actually worked in M&A advisory. So I'd only done one role being a finance manager. The rest of the time I was advising listed and unlisted businesses on acquisitive activity. So I think it kind of stood me in good stead in commercial roles that I've worked in, because obviously the nuts and bolts of accounting is important. So you've got to get compliance, month-end reporting, proper systems, proper processes, et cetera, running smoothly. But I think the extra string to my bow that has put me in good stead is the fact that I know how to do M&A, where I've had the best of both worlds, in the sense that I've got the ability to work on a deal from cradle to grave. And the additional skill set I've got now is that I'm pretty good at integrating businesses post the deal happening. Because what happens when you're on the advisory side, you kind of do the deal, you bill the client. Once the money flows, you then move on to the next deal. The rubber kind of hits the road when you've got to integrate a business and you've got to try and realize synergies that were done in the investment case and, bolt it on properly and make sure that the compliance stuff is working. So tax, and when you do purchase price allocations, to make sure you've calculated goodwill correctly, and all the finance, how do you integrate the finance team? How do you make sure we all, trying to simplify everything onto one system? So I think that's something that's going to become more and more prevalent, is to be a well-rounded and successful finance professional, Chris. You have to be able to understand the compliance side. You got to understand the BAU side, and you got to understand the M&A side. And if you don't have all of those, I think you are going to struggle in a fast-paced environment.
I think so. And like the M&A side, like it's certainly the more commercial side in general, but the M&A side is a lot of the reason that people would get into accounting anyway, because it is the sexier kind of side. Say, you're in a PwC at the moment, or a chartered accounting environment. What advice would you give to people in that environment that want to expand into these more commercial and sexier type roles?
It's a good question, Chris. I think there's a lot of demand for people in professional services to come into commerce. But I guess ultimately, to answer your question, if they do decide to come in, perhaps for me, I've always been industry agnostic, which I'm not sure has been the right or the wrong way in my career. I think something to think about is perhaps, for starters, think about what industry interests you. Now, the nice thing of working in professional services, you're usually exposed to a multitude of industries. So I don't think the Australian market is big enough to only specialize in one industry, although people in your line of work might see it differently. But I think the obvious place to start is what industry interests you. And also, just the other thing is, I've chatted to recruiters like yourself. I've always been of the opinion that, you shouldn't go on Seek and LinkedIn and just use what I'd call a spray and pray approach, where you apply for every single commercial role that you see and hope that one lands. I think you need to be quite selective as regards to who you use in your network. Now, as an example, and we've spoken about this privately, is I only have 3 or 4 recruiters in my network that I probably keep in contact with regularly, because a big thing is culture fit. Because finance skills are quite transferable. If you're good in Excel and you understand, if you can build financial models and draft fancy PowerPoint presentations, and you can communicate well to management, I think you can work in a lot of industries. But a big thing is that, do you believe in the company story? Who's your network of recruiters that you want to chat to? What industries are you interested in? I guess what I'm trying to get at in a roundabout way is, I think a little bit of planning, a little bit of thought goes a long way. Because I worked in professional services for a long time, Chris. And what happens is that you get bogged down by the bureaucracy and the long hours, and especially when you're at the manager level, you do get smashed pretty hard by the partners and the directors. If you do decide to take the plunge and leave, just I think a little bit of thought goes a long way. Because I also think if you're chatting to recruiters saying, I just want to get out and I hate doing what I'm doing, putting myself in your shoes I just think you haven't basically thought what you want to do with your career. And I think a little bit of nous around that, I think, goes a long way.
I mean, it definitely helps the recruiters that you choose to engage as well when you think about it, and then we can target clients on your behalf. And like, I do agree with what you're saying when you're sort of mentioning that, a lot of your skill set is transferable, and it's up to us as recruiters to make the client aware of that essentially as well, and look at the personality and look at the person rather than look at a piece of paper. I mean, that's essentially our job, right? I guess what I'm interested to know from that is what made you certain that it was the right time for you to move, and if there's someone in that environment at the minute that's thinking, oh, is it the right time for me to move? Like, what would you say? What would you say sort of culminated in that move for you?
It's a good question, Chris, and it's something I've thought about at length in my working career. I think it's a multi-pronged answer. I think the first one is a very good thing to do is to have a mentor, and to have someone who isn't part of the organization that you work for that's your mentor. So if I think of who my mentor is in Australia, someone that you know very well, and I think you've interviewed on this podcast, or you're going to, if I've ever feel like I've come to that crossroads in my career, I'll meet up with him for a coffee or a cold beverage, and I'll basically just bounce my ideas off him to get a fresh set of eyes. Because I think what happens sometimes is, if you're so caught up in the detail, and sometimes it's good to just have a cold look at what's going on with your circumstances. Because I think in your career, ultimately you need a bit of luck, but I think timing is also important, because sometimes it doesn't, like, think logically in the recruitment space, is it a good example unless you get really lucky? Again, realistically, it probably doesn't make sense to resign between, say, November and February as an example. So you've got to be strategic around your thinking. So I think a big thing is it's good to have a mentor if you can, and also think about when you're going to pull the trigger. Because yes, at the end of the day, whilst you might be sick and tired of what you're doing, or you want to try something different, you also don't want to have it on your CV that you're just jumping from pillar to post. There's something that for me has always raised a huge red flag is if someone's changing jobs every 1 to 2 years, you're starting to think, well, they might be smart and have a good brain and all that, but why is it that they can't hold a job down for longer than 2 cycles?
Right. Okay.
And I think statistically, what I've learned is that someone can't sit out more than 2 cycles. I think it's something, I'm not saying it's definitive, but it's just it's a marker that you should look at. So I think those are the obvious things I can think of. And I think the other thing is it's just a bit of intuition. I mean, you kind of know that if you've come to the end of the road, and ultimately it's a bit like religious or political beliefs. You kind of deep down, that if you've had enough and you want to do something different. And with mentors as well, I don't think it's right to just canvass 6 different opinions, because I think then you're going to get 6 different answers, and it sometimes confuses you even more. I think you need to be very selective. I've actually done a lot of research on this myself, and with a mentor, you actually need to pick your mentor. It's not the other way around.
Yeah.
Someone's not going to come up to you and say, you know what, I want to be your mentor and I'm going to help you go through your career, because life doesn't work like that. If you don't get off your rear end and actually tell people that, look, sometimes you actually have to be quite explicit about it. It's like, dear Joe Blogs, I've worked for you or around you. I got a hell of a lot of respect for your achievements and your commercial nous and your strategic thinking. And I think I have a hell of a lot to learn from you. Are you comfortable for me to bounce things off you and chat to you? And I've got a few people like that in my network that would probably call me their mentor, that I don't work for them anymore. Because, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here, but something that I've also tried to do in this space is also to pay it forward. Because at the end of the day, I think you have an obligation as a leader to try and empower your team members around you to just be better finance professionals and better human beings. I think if you're not doing that, you're failing as a leader. And that's something that I feel I haven't always got that in my career, but I've had a few people that have given that to me. And I've always tried to take the best for the people that I've worked with, and I've tried to use that in my leadership style with teams that I've managed now and I've managed in the past. So.
Really good points in there. I think firstly, I guess choosing your mentor is absolutely key, and having that one person that you trust and getting advice from them is really good advice to give. You know, you have it in meetings. I read something about, you know, any more than 3 people in a meeting and nothing gets accomplished, right? So it's kind of like if you get 8 or 9 people in a meeting, it's like there's too many cooks, right? You want the one person that you can lean on, that you can trust, and you can get advice and mentorship from. It's really good. I guess, like, going back to the beginning of your career, obviously where you're at now, you're involved in the commercial stuff, the M&A, and what was it that made you get into accounting at the beginning of your career?
It's a good question, Chris. So what happened was I actually wanted to become a journalist. I wanted to become a sports commentator. That was my real goal in life. Without boring you to death with the South African political landscape, I kind of realized that if I didn't play for the Springboks, it was highly unlikely I was ever going to get a job in the broadcasting space. So the only other thing I was actually ever good at was accounting. I wasn't good at science. I wasn't good at the sciences, etc., etc. But accounting always just made perfectly logical sense to me. Because for me to be a great accountant, you just need a fair amount of common sense and half a brain.
What was it like? What made you aware that you were good at this? I mean,
so if I gave you a report card, that was the only subject that I would consistently just smash it. I always found accounting, without wanting to sound arrogant, I always just found it to be pretty easy. And the reason being is because it's incredibly logical. There are obviously lots of gray areas, and we've got to use professional judgments and stuff like that. But nuts and bolts, debits and credits and all that, to me, just always just made perfectly logical sense. And I know it sounds cliched, but at the end of the day, there's a reason why there's so many CEOs of companies that are chartered accountants by background. Because again, the skills are easily transferable. And yeah, like I was saying, I think for me, accounting was something I was always good at. And I always figured if I could make it as a chartered accountant, I'd always have a job and I'd always make a decent living. So, you know, whilst I've always had some ups and downs, I think I fell into it because it was probably the only subject I was ever good at. And, you know, I've always been fascinated by business. It's something that, you know, in terms of my economic beliefs, I'm very much a massive believer in capitalism and the free market. And whilst there are some things about it in modern society that are perverse and can be improved upon, the fact is that capitalism is probably the greatest thing to happen in human history, in my opinion. So it's dragged more people out of poverty. It's an education and business has made the world a fundamentally better place, in my opinion. So it's something I'm very passionate about, and it's something that I've always just enjoyed being a part of.
When you think about your career as a whole, what was that moment of truth that elevated you to where you are now, would you say?
That's a good question. Although I have a bit of a weird career, Chris, in the sense that I've kind of worked out by default what I don't want to do with my career. Some people work out a lot earlier than me what they do want to do with their career. So when I was younger, I had this idea in my head that I would be this master deal maker, and I would be this M&A champion that would just do these deals that would be on the front page of the AFR. I subsequently came to realize that probably isn't quite what I want to do with my life. Then when I got into commerce, something that became a professional goal of mine was I wanted to be CFO of a listed company. I think that's something that I felt pretty strongly about, and I believe I've got the skill set and the nous and the ability to do it. The current role that I'm in is not a listed company, but in some respects, it actually has more red tape and bureaucracy than a listed company because our ultimate parent is in the UK. And with it being a global insurance business with their reporting deadlines and stuff, in some respects, it might actually be easier to be listed on the ASX. So, yeah, I think I've kind of worked out that commerce is better for me than professional services. I've kind of worked in both in my career, as you were alluding to earlier. But I think I'm a lot better suited to the commercial world than the professional services world.
Okay.
And I've come to realize that in terms of the moment of truth, I think the difference between being a financial controller and a head of finance or a CFO is technical skills and being able to write pretty reports and balance management accounts is only part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think you need to have a couple more strings in your bow. You got to be able to manage teams. You need to manage difficult personalities that sit above you, and you need to basically be thought of as problem solver. And I think the mindset shift, whilst I think I've always had it, but I think it's something I've improved in the last couple of years, is to be number 2 in the team. You kind of identify the problem and you take it to number 1, and then you say, how do I fix this? Whereas you've almost got to take professional judgment and say, well, when is it that I just need to grab the bull by the horns and fix it by myself? And when is it that I need to go take it to my boss? And it's a very difficult skill set to learn, and it's probably taken me nearly 20 years to get it right. And I've still got a fair ways to go. But I think that's what sets, I'm obviously only mid senior level in my role. But I think to get from the, if you just want to be the financial controller or a finance manager to that level above, it's that intangible skill set that kind of sets you apart. And that's, for me, probably one of the most important parts of my day-to-day responsibilities.
Yeah, fair enough. Very fair. Next question is going to lead on to what other advice you have to give to the next generation, because you've already given a bit of advice there. But I loved what you said about taking the bull by the horns and using initiative, essentially, to figure out problems. Is there anything else, any other advice you would give to the generation coming through?
Well, look, I think there's a couple of things. I think, there's probably 3 or 4 pillars that you need to think about, right? So the first one is you've got to make sure that you've got the correct technical skills and qualifications. So I think, in my opinion, whether you're a CA or CPA, I'll leave that argument as to what you think is better. In my opinion, as long as you hold one of the two, I think that'll put you in good stead, one way or the other. So I think that's the most obvious pillars. You've got to have a strong foundation, which is your technical skill set. I think something to think about is, where is it that you're going to spend the first 4 or 5 years of your career? Now, traditionally, that was always working at either a Big Four or one of the bigger professional services firms, because they teach you how to use Excel, they teach you how to write PowerPoint presentations, they teach you how to deal with other finance teams, senior executives, et cetera, et cetera. And then the other thing to think about is, how do you build up your network? And I think, in my opinion, I've always thought things like networking events are a lot of garbage, if I must be blunt. I think you build up your network just by osmosis over time. You build it up by dealing with clients. You build it up by dealing with colleagues, so that either you work with or they move to other jobs, and then you continue staying in touch with them. And then I think the other thing is to think about, what do you actually want to do with your career? Because you only have a finite amount of time to do this. I turned 41 a couple of months ago. I'm going to do this for another, probably because it's a Sydney and mortgages are violently expensive, I'm going to probably be doing this for another 20 to 25 years, right?
Yeah.
And I think to think very clearly is that, what is your professional Everest? Now, there's no right or wrong answer. For some people, I've got people on my team that are comfortable being bookkeepers for the rest of their lives. I have people on my team that want to be CFO one day. I have people on my team that are quite comfortable being finance managers for the rest of their lives, and that's fine. There's no right or wrong answer. But at the end of the day, you've got one crack at it. What is it that you want to do that's going to get you out of bed every morning? And I think, if you don't think about that, to your point from earlier, is that you need to drive what you want to do with your career. No one's going to do it for you.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah. And I think it's something that's wrong in modern society or modern culture, is people expect to be handed opportunities. They expect to be handed ideas. At the end of the day, whether we like to admit it or not, we live in a competitive world, and there's a war for talent out there. And if you don't take initiative and you don't do these things yourself, no one's going to do it for you.
Yeah,
it might work to a certain level, but if you want to start earning a certain amount of money or be in a certain place in your career, you've got to do that extra 5 or 10% to get there. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck in your career. And I think that's where all the stuff I spoke about earlier around mentorship and having a clear plan and thinking about what you want to do with your life can help elevate you from there.
I do agree. I think especially coming through the ranks nowadays, if you can show initiative and enthusiasm and dare I say it, no entitlement to what you deserve, but actually prove it by doing your job, it actually sets you well above most other people in your peer group these days. So it is something that I would encourage. I will also take you off the invite for any future networking events that you have, mate. I do agree with some of them, but obviously the ones that Ambition host are absolutely fantastic. You should try them. But I really appreciate you coming along today and giving your insights. It's been really good, giving some really, really good advice. Really love to hear your perspective on mentoring and the advice that you gave around that. And obviously for anyone else coming through, to really grab the bull by the horns and take their own initiative. Really good advice to end on, mate. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
No, it was a pleasure. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. Take care.
No worries, mate. All good.
That concludes another insightful episode of Career Insights with Ambition. If you've been inspired by today's conversation, share it with a friend or leave us a review and subscribe to the podcast. Until next time, keep leading with ambition and turning your moments of truth into milestones for success. All right. All right, cool. Career Insights with Ambition, brought to you by Ambition, a specialist recruitment agency committed to building better futures for organisations we work for and the professionals we help. Subject matter experts in accounting and finance, banking and financial services, technology and transformation, we're here to help. Find out more at ambition.com.au.